Welcome back to the podcast where we ask the question, what makes you happy? My name is Jake Pearson, and today we have with us an artist, an art teacher who helps artists shine. We've got Carrie Brummer from Spring, Texas, USA, and I really hope that I pronounced that, Carrie. How are you?
This is spot on. Thank you. I'm well, thank you. And thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm super excited. Thank you for coming on the podcast. And it's going to be a really unique perspective because I don't think we've had many creatives and artists to come and share what makes them happy. So would you please start with what makes you happy?
Well, the most obvious is making art, having time and space. There's something so, I don't know, it's kind of soul food for me to be able to, the act of making. It's not about the product, which I think a lot of people have a misconception about. It's the process of making a work. And I find as a teacher that it's also my students' desire to make, though they don't always give themselves that permission, and they feel like they have to have a certain skill level or a certain talent in order to give themselves that time and permission to create. And I know for myself that I didn't start, riding a bike, without falling a few times. And art is a skill that you can develop. And I've seen my own personal growth. And that's kind of part of the satisfaction, I think, as well, doing that work. I feel a real sense of joy just showing up in my studio. And I typically work in portraiture and studying the faces that I explore and working in the materials that I do.
I really resonate with what you've said there in terms of the process and not the end destination. Yeah, the end destination is great, but it's all about the creation itself, the new skills and the things that you learn about yourself along the way, isn't it?
Absolutely. I will say I had my first solo exhibition a few years ago, and that weekend I felt such joy, but it was in part because my family and friends came to celebrate this with me, and they could see and recognize the years of effort that went into that moment. And that's what made, that kind of culminating event so special to me. But without that process of spending the time and studying the work and coming up with the concept for the show, none of that would have happened. And I don't think any of that joy from those events would have even been there if I hadn't spent that time showing up in the studio, even on days when maybe I wasn't as excited to show up and work on those paintings.
Yeah, and I think there's a really important message there with what you said. It's not just about that end destination. It's about everything you do leading up to it, the hardships, the highs, the lows. And if you experience that, it's just going to make that moment more bittersweet and enjoyable right there when you got to that show, which I really resonate with. I've referenced this in the podcast before. I built my own garden beds instead of paying for them. And just by doing that, I found a lot more satisfaction and happiness of learning how to put it together, putting the soil in, growing the produce, the vegetables in that was really fulfilling. And it gave me a lot of joy rather than just buying them and going, cool. Every time I walk past them, I go, hey, I made that. That was
Exactly.
mine. And I know all the work that went into that. So
Exactly.
yeah, similar. What would you say as an artist then to our listeners who are struggling to find something that makes them happy in their life?
So part of my passion as an educator involves helping people show up with their creativity. And obviously I specifically deal with drawing and painting. That's kind of my jam. However, I also try to encourage everyone to embrace their creative interests, whatever they look like. There's a researcher, his name is Dr. Stuart Brown, and he studied play and this notion of play. And for me, play, is expressed through art. Play might be different for several listeners here. Everyone's going to have a different answer. But he found in his research that there was a direct correlation between lack of play in the lives of children and later violent criminal offenses from people in a prison that he connected with. And I feel like for me, that's the answer. Like, there is nothing more powerful than us showing up for our creativity without feeling like we have to monetize it or do something with it. The act of showing up for something we care about is so valuable, it can literally change the trajectory of your life.
Wonderfully put, Carrie. Thank you so much for sharing all things that make you happy and that beautiful piece of advice there as well.
Thank you.
Beautiful. It's been a pleasure. And if you would love to connect with Carrie, you can do so by clicking the podcast episode description below. Until next time, Carrie. Thanks for listening to the podcast. We hope it gives you something to think about on your quest to discover what makes you happy. Make sure to check out whatmakesyouhappypodcast.com to to connect with today's guest and follow us on all our social media platforms, and to stay up to date at what's happening next and what makes you happy. Don't forget to share this episode with a friend, and we'll see you next time.